Hello children, this video class is an initiative of Shiv Jyoti Educational Group. I, Shavya Vyas, welcome you all to your online classes of English text. So today we shall be doing chapter 1, the invention of shoes. So before we start with the chapter, I request all of you to open your Gulmohar textbook, Language for Life. So please open your Gulmohar textbook and come to page number 1. So children, let's start with chapter 1, the invention of shoes, in page number 1. Has been adapted from Jhuta Avishkar, written by Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore was a renowned, means famous, Indian poet, educator, painter and social reformer. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913 for his beautiful collection of verses, Gitanjali. So, Rabindranath Tagore, he won the Nobel Prize for his verses, Gitanjali, and he was the first Indian to receive a Nobel Prize. He had a deep interest in children and wrote many poems about them. That is, Rabindranath Tagore was very fond of children and he wrote many poems about them. So children, let's start with the chapter, page number 1, chapter The Invention of Shoes. Once upon a time there was a king called Hobo. So here comes your first internal question. So before we start with the internal question, I want all of you to take out a pencil and a ruler. You're supposed to write the internal questions in the textbook itself. So please note children, you have to write your internal questions only in the textbook. Write the question in pencil and underline the answer with a pencil and ruler. Is that clear? So your first internal question is, what was the name of the king? And the answer is King Hobo. So children, please start writing the first internal question in your textbook along with me. So your first internal question is, what was the name of the king? Of the king. The first internal question is, what was the name of the king? So, what's the answer to first internal question? What was the name of the king? Answer is King Hobo. So, underline King Hobo in pencil and write answer 1. One morning, he summoned his minister. Please underline your new word summoned. Summoned means ordered. He ordered his minister and said, "Listen, Goburai, I stayed up all night thinking, why should the dust dirty my royal feet whenever I step on the ground?" So the king was worried and was fussy, that is, royal feet were getting dirty whenever he stepped on the ground. All you people, you are only concerned with pocketing your fat salaries. That is, the king was very unhappy, was very displeased with his people because he felt that his people, they were only worried about filling their pockets with fat salaries or huge salaries. You have no concern for the king or the kingdom or the problems that bother me. The king felt that his people did not care for the king or the kingdom or the problems that bothered the king. You must put an end to this at once, or else no one shall be spared from my royal wrath. Wrath means anger. So he warned his minister that if his people did not solve his problem, then they will have to face the consequences of his wrath or anger. Goburai wondered and worried. He thought deeply and he started worrying. He pondered and perspired. Please underline your new words, pondered and perspired. Pondered means he thought deeply about the problem, and perspired means he sweated. So the Pandit's face turned pale. Pale means losing the color of the face. So the Pandit's face turned pale because of fear. The courtiers' nights turned sleepless. They started spending sleepless nights in the palace. In the kitchen, the cooking stopped. In the castle, the crying started. Why did all this happen? Because everyone in his kingdom, they started fearing the king's anger. Gopurai looked far and wide and gathered all the scientists. Please underline your new word, gathered. Gathered means brought together. So he searched far and wide for wise and learned people and all the scholars and mechanics he could find. They pushed their glasses up their noses and sat down to find a solution to the royal problem. So they thought and thought, pondered over the problem, and they started thinking deeply to find a solution to the king's problem. After thinking long and deep, they said, if you do away with the soil, or if you get rid of the soil, how will you grow crops? They understood that they cannot get rid of the soil, because if they got rid of the soil, then crops could not be grown. The king replied, if you cannot figure out how, then of what use are you? The king got angry. He got furious that there was no solution to his problem. So they thought some more, and they made a purchase of 17,50,000 brooms. So these wise men, these learned men, in order to protect themselves from the king's wrath or anger, they thought some more and they took out a solution. What was the solution? They decided that they would make workers dust the entire kingdom to clear the kingdom of dust. So they made a purchase of 17,50,000 brooms, and workers were summoned or ordered to carry out the dusting of the kingdom. So here comes your second internal question. How many brooms were purchased for the dusting of the kingdom? So children, let's start writing the second internal question in your textbook. How many brooms were purchased for the dusting of the kingdom? For the dusting of the kingdom. So I repeat your second internal question. How many brooms were purchased for the dusting of the kingdom? So you can find the answer in page number 2. Question 2. How many brooms were purchased for the dusting of the kingdom? The answer is in page number 2, second line. 17,50,000 brooms. So children, you are supposed to write this question in pencil and underline the answer in pencil. So here's your question 2 and here's your answer to 17,50,000 brooms. So the workers were summoned. The summon means ordered. So the workers were ordered and the dusting of the kingdom commenced or began. The dust covered the king's face and chest. Earlier only the feet were covered with dust, but now the king's face and chest were also covered with dust. No one could open their eyes because of the dust. The entire kingdom was filled with so much dust that people could not even open their eyes. No one could see the sun. They could not even see the sun because of the dust. People coughed and choked. The kingdom was almost buried under the dust. The king said, "You were supposed to get rid of the dust, not fill the world with it." This made the king very furious. This made the king very angry. And he said that instead of getting rid of the dust, now you're filling the entire kingdom with dust. Then 21 lakh water carriers set out with bags of water. Now that this plan failed miserably, another plan was made. What was the next plan? The wise men, they planned that now we will clean the kingdom with water. So water carriers were ordered to clean the entire kingdom with bags of water. So how many water carriers were appointed? 21 lakh water carriers were appointed. They ran fast and they ran all over, pouring water whenever they saw a speck of dust. Please underline your new word speck. Speck means a very tiny or small particle. So these water carriers, they carried about their work seriously. Wherever they saw dust, even a small particle of dust, they cleaned the area with water. Now all the ponds and lakes were soon overflowing with mud. Earlier, ponds and lakes, they were filled with water. But because of the cleaning of dust, now ponds and lakes, they were filled with mud. No boat could move on the river. The ponds, lakes, rivers, they were all filled with mud, and because of that, boats could not move because there was no water anymore. Since there was no water, the water creatures perished or died. The land creatures tried their hand at swimming. They could hardly walk or run on the mud. That is, the land creatures could not swim in these ponds, lakes and rivers anymore, and they could not even walk or run on the mud. No bazaar could be set up, so trading stopped. So because there was no water, there was no water transport, and because there was no water transport, trading also stopped. All the king's subjects sneezed and coughed and sniffed and suffered. Please underline your new word sniffed. Sniffed means to draw in air through the nose, something like this. So when you sniff, when you cry, or when you have a cold, you sniff. So all the king's people, they sneezed and coughed and sniffed and suffered. The king said, "What a lot of fools! They got rid of the dust only to replace it with mud." That is, the problem was not solved. This problem led to another problem. Once again, everyone gathered to solve the royal problem. So once again, people were gathered to solve the royal problem. Once again, the great men and their assistants racked their great brains. Racked their great brains means tried very hard to think of something. So again they thought hard, again they racked their brains to find a solution. They thought and then thought harder, but they were baffled and blank. No matter how much they thought, they were still baffled, they were still perplexed, they were still puzzled, and they were still blank. They were at a loss to know how to lose the dust. They had no idea how to get rid of the dust. Someone said, "Cover the earth with mats. Rugs and carpets shall stop the dust from touching the royal feet." So one of the suggestions they got was to cover the earth with mats, rugs and carpets to prevent the dust from touching the royal feet. Someone else suggested, "Keep the king indoors." Indoors means inside or inside the palace. See to it there's no hole or loophole anywhere. Please underline your new word loophole. Loophole means a very small or narrow opening. If he does not step on dust, no dust shall touch his royal feet. The king said, very true, but I am worried. If I were to stay shut up indoors every day, all day, then the royal machinery shall come to a stop. My kingdom shall be ruined. So initially, the king liked the idea of staying indoors because he felt that by staying indoors, he can protect his feet from getting dirty. But then he realized this cannot be practical because if he stayed indoors the whole day, every day, then how will he govern his kingdom? And this can lead to his kingdom getting ruined or destroyed. Then taking matters into his own hands, the king announced, call the tanners, all of them. Wrap the whole land in leather. This shall be my great contribution, a mighty blanket for the dusty earth. So who are tanners? Tanners are people who work with leather. So what was the great suggestion made by the great king? He said to protect his feet from getting dirty, he would cover the whole earth with leather. So tanners, people who make leather, they were called. Everyone bowed to the king. What a brilliant idea, your royal highness, they said. It is only a question of finding a tanner good enough. Everyone praised the brilliant idea of the king, and they said, now that we got the solution, only thing to do was to find a good tanner. The royal emissaries or messengers set off in every which way. Everyone stopped what they were doing and rushed out to look for a tanner good enough. So all the people in the kingdom, they were running in search of a good tanner. Where could they find such a tanner, and where could they find so much leather? So much leather to cover the whole earth. At last, the chief tanner of the kingdom presented himself at the royal court. So then there appeared the chief tanner, and he presented himself before the king. He was an old man. Who was an old man? The chief tanner was an old man. He bowed to the king, smiled a little and said, if your royal highness permits, I have a suggestion to make. It might fulfill your wish in a simple yet effective way. What is effective way? In a way that works well. So the royal tanner, the chief tanner, he brought an effective solution before the king. So what was the solution? You may make your suggestions, said the king. Please underline your new word suggestion. Suggestion means an idea or a plan. Cover your royal feet, your royal highness, said the old tanner. Then you shall not have to cover the whole earth. See what a brilliant idea the wise tanner gave. What did he say? He said, instead of covering the whole earth with leather, why don't you cover the royal highness feet with leather? So, if it was all that easy to solve the problem, said the king, would everyone in the kingdom have lost their sleep over it? The king found it silly that when there was such an easy solution to his problem, what was the need for the people in his kingdom to crack their heads over it, to spend sleepless nights over finding a simple solution? Arrest the fellow, said Goburai, and throw him into jail. In the meantime, Goburai, who felt this to be a very stupid and silly suggestion, wanted to arrest the chief tanner and put him in jail. But already the old tanner was deep at work. Sitting down at the king's feet, he had been measuring and cutting, stitching and fitting. That is, even before the king could give a reaction to the minister's arrest suggestion, the old tanner, had already gotten to work on the king's new shoes. Before the king could decide whether to throw him into jail or to forgive him, he had finished a neat pair of shoes and presented it to his Royal Highness. So before the king could decide whether to forgive him or punish him, the chief tanner, the old wise tanner, had already gotten a neat pair of shoes ready for the king. King Hobu put on the shoes. They fit him perfectly. His royal feet felt warm and snug and most importantly clean. What is snug? Snug means comfortable. So did the king like the shoes? Yes. Why? Because these shoes fitted him perfectly. These shoes felt warm and snug and most importantly clean. So these shoes made the king's feet feel warm, comfortable and clean. So children, let us start writing the third internal question. Please write along with me in your textbook, okay? So question 3, how did the king's feet feel after wearing the shoes? After wearing the shoes. So your question is, how did the king's feet feel after wearing the shoes? So your third internal question is in page number 4. How did the king's feet feel after wearing the shoes? Okay, you have to write this question in pencil and underline the answer in pencil. So the answer is, his feet felt warm, snug and clean. So you will have to underline his feet felt warm, okay, snug and clean. Okay, so this is the answer to the third question. How did the king's feet feel after wearing the shoes? His feet felt warm, snug and clean. The minister spared the old tanner. Please underline your new word spared. Spared means refrained or stopped oneself from punishing. So when the minister saw the happy and pleased face of the king, he decided that he would stop himself from punishing the tanner. The minister said, I had the same idea myself. Some way or the other, the fellow must have got hold of my idea. So the minister pretended that he already had the same idea that the tanner had, and he tried to take credit for the tanner's brilliant idea. And so from that day began the use of shoes. So this was the day when shoes were first made. The royal feet were saved. The royal feet were saved from the dust. So was Gobu. Gobu was saved from the king's anger, and so was the earth, because nobody caused more sufferings to the people there because of the silly suggestions of the people, of the so-called wise people. So this chapter, children, has been adapted from Jhuta Abhishkar by Rabindranath Tagore. This was initially in Bengali and had been translated by Kamalika Mitra. So children, what did you learn from this story? You can see the actual hero in the story is the old wise tanner. It was he who gave the brilliant idea and solved the king's problem. And what else can you learn from the story? Whenever you have a problem, you have to stay calm and you have to find a simple yet practical solution that can be worked out easily. So children, this concludes explanation part of this chapter. So children, let us now mark the word meanings in your textbook. Okay. So please come to page number 1. Your first word meaning is wrath, which means anger. Now let's come to page number 2. Please come to page number 2, and your second word meaning is commenced, which means began. Please come to page number 3, children. Come to page number 3, and your third word meaning is tanners. Who are tanners? These are people who make leather. And your fourth word meaning is emissaries, which means messengers or representatives. And please come to page number 4, and we'll come to the last word meaning, word meaning snug. Okay, snug means comfortable. That you write the chapter 1, the invention of shoes, and draw the red margins at the appropriate places. So let's go through the list of new words that you had already marked in the textbook. What are these new words? 1. Summoned. 2. Pondered. 3. Perspired. 4. Gathered. 5. Speck. 6. Sniffed. 7. Loophole. 8. Highness. 9. Suggestion. And 10. Spared. So now we shall do the word meaning. What are the word meanings? 1. Wrath, which means anger. 2. Commenced, which means began. 3. Tanners, people who make leather. 4. Emissaries, which means messengers or representatives. 5. Snug, which means comfortable. The invention of shoes. Draw your red margins at the appropriate places, and let's start with answer the following questions. Question 1. What was King Hobu worried about? Answer. King Hobu was worried about his feet getting dirty whenever he stepped on the ground. He wanted his feet to remain clean. Let us now come to the second question. Why was Gobu Rai worried? Who was Gobu Rai? He was the minister. He was worried as the king wanted him to find out a solution to his problem, and he didn't know how to solve his problem. Let us now come to question 3. How did Gobu Rai try to solve his problem? Gobu Rai gathered all the scientists, scholars and ministers to find a solution to the royal's problem. Let us now come to question 4. What was the suggestion that the king gave to his problem? Answer. King Hobu suggested that the whole world should be covered with a leather blanket to protect it from dust. Now comes the last question, question 5. Who solved the king's problem and how? Answer. The chief tanner of the kingdom solved the problem. Instead of covering the whole earth, he covered the king's feet by making a pair of shoes with leather. The next question is reference to context. Okay. The first one. What is the statement? You were supposed to get rid of dust, not fill the world with it. A. Who said these words? Answer. King Hobu said these words. B. Why did he say so? Answer. He said so because the dusting of the kingdom with brooms created so much dust that everybody was coughing and sneezing and nobody could see anything clearly. So let's now start with make sentences. Your first word is worried. Worried means felt worried, felt troubled or anxious. So the sentence is, my mom is worried about my health. Your second make sentence is choked. Choked means being unable to breathe. So she choked on a mouthful of tea. So children, make sure to underline the word choked and worried. Your third make sentence, contribution. What is contribution? Contribution, that is something that you give someone to help. They thanked him for his contribution of time and money. So please underline the word contribution. Brilliant. Brilliant means very clever. I am having a brilliant idea for today's ceremony. So please underline the word brilliant. So children, we just completed the explanation of chapter 1, the invention of shoes. The invention of shoes. I hope you had a great time and I hope you all study well and enjoy your day.